Well, hi, this is Ira Gorlick, and this lecture is on what is the community's role in commerce. So the first thing I need to define is what is a community. So I define a community as any defined collection of people. So it could be a family, a neighborhood, a city, a country, a group of countries like the EU. It could be homeowners association or a condo association, a trade union, a sports league, etc. To me, the way to define a community is that it has a set of rules. Sometimes those rules are explicit, like a constitution, and sometimes they're implicit, like a culture. And a community can be either voluntary or non-voluntary. A child does not ask to belong to the community of the family, and at some point the child can leave the family. They can choose to stay or choose to go. So at some points communities are voluntary, and at some points that they're not voluntary. Historically, because of the limits of communication and transportation technology, communities were small and localized. So think about historically, communities were very small and very localized. But then because of the technological evolution, specifically I look at the printing press and the internal combustion engine, which either drove or allowed for more expansive communities. This prompted the rise of national and international communities in Europe in the 16th and 17th century, and the United States in the 18th century. Then in the 19th century, with the domestication of the electron, even more encompassing communities such as the European Union and international banking was created. People have always been members of many communities at the same time. You could be members of a church, a family, a state, work, friends, ethnic, sports, etc. So it's common for you to be members of multiple communities at the same time. And today, because of transportation and communication technology, the diversity of these communities is even orders of magnitude greater than ever before. So before, your church might have been a very small, homogeneous community. Now, because of transportation and communication, your church might be very diverse. Now, I want to distinguish community from government. Oftentimes, they're confused. For me, the government is the process by which a community operationalizes its rules. So the community is the higher level or the lower level, as you will. The government is just the administration of the community's rules. An interesting thing about the government is, like communities, at some point they're voluntary and at some point they're not voluntary. If I don't like the government, I can move. But can I? Can my 16-year-old move? Can my 90-year-old mother move? This is important when we get into talk about taxes and other things in terms of how voluntary government is. I just want to make you sure you understand that throughout the course, I will most often use the term community in place of the term government. So you'll often hear about people who talk about limited government. To me, what they're asking for is limited community involvement, not limited government, but limited community involvement. So instead of saying limited government, I'll say limited community involvement. Now I asked the question, what is the community's role in commerce? So we need to define what that means, role in. So a community can have a direct role in terms of hours of operations or zoning. It can have an indirect role in terms of its culture, for example, no cheating, like in golf. I was watching a movie the other day on golf, and there was an issue with cheating. It was The Legend of Bagger Vance. And in terms of a person had to call a fault on themselves. That was a cultural role in the community. And then, and actually it's probably even explicit too. And then actually there's a natural role. Language and culture plays a role in the community's role in commerce. So when I specifically say role in, I'm talking about laws, standards, and regulations. Now there's three views of a community's roles in terms of what is the role of the community in optimizing commerce. There are some that say there should be no role. The commerce is a transaction between a buyer and a seller. The community should not be involved at all. There are those that believe that there should be some role of the community, the optimum commerce depends on the community setting standards of behavior. And then finally, there are those that we call totalitarians that believe that optimum commerce cannot happen without the community controlling it all. I'll give you my basic assumptions here. I believe that commerce exists. That's not a stretch. But here's one that I think may be somewhat controversial. I don't know. Commerce exists to benefit the community, not the other way around. So, if commerce exists and optimum commerce exists, then one way to measure optimum commerce is to measure it by the maximum benefit to the community. Now, it's really critical to note that benefit to the community is subjective, dynamic, and relative to the specific context. So remember I talked about how the setting of value is relative to the specific context? Well, here I'm saying the same thing, that how you measure the benefit to the community is relative to the specific context. Let me show this as sort of a graphical approach. In terms of the community's role in commerce, at one end of the spectrum you have what we call the anarcho-capitalists, and they're the Ayn Rand libertarians. You might want to read Murray Rothbard or David Friedman for some of the thinkers in this area, where the community should have no role in commerce. Commerce is simply a transaction between a buyer and a seller. Then at the other end, you have the totalitarians. And I've listed Stalin's Russia, North Korea, Maoist China. Now, those are all recent. I got to believe there had to be a lot of examples in the past of totalitarian thinking in terms of the community's role in commerce, but that's something we can certainly research later in the class. And then most people believe that there should be some role of community in commerce. And I've listed here conservatives and progressives. I would list that conservatives tend to think of it, there should be less role, a community's role in commerce than progressives. And I'd be interested to hear what you think of this chart as it is, just to show you where I stand. And let me just say, where you stand in this chart goes a long way to understand where you stand on net neutrality. And that's me. I'm way over here into almost none category. I think that the community's role in commerce should be very slight. Give you a little of my overall bias on this. If I put it on a scale, you can see me there on the left in terms of less community involvement, because I believe less community involvement is better. But I do believe that some community involvement is necessary. Some of the influential thinkers that I'm going to talk a lot about here in order to justify my positions is F.A. Hayek, Adam Smith, John Keyes, Milton Friedman. I think, and this is based a lot of the work on F.A. Hayek, individuals know more about what is optimum for them than the community. However, individuals do need a community, particularly in the 21st century, to optimize their lives. I don't grow my own food. I don't make my own computers. I rely on a lot of other people. To paraphrase Barack Obama, I didn't build it. I rely on a lot of other people to help me achieve what I need to achieve to optimize my life. So the next lecture, I'm going to talk about rational actors, and that's going to be critical for understanding of how free market works.